Shabbat Shalom and welcome back to our weekly Torah conversations. This past Shabbat, a week ago, I attended the annual convention of the National Association of Retired Reform Rabbis, NAOR. More than 150 rabbis were present, along with spouses, significant others, widows. I was thrilled and honored to hear from many of my colleagues that they watched this weekly posting. What a kick! I somehow even felt honored when one colleague assured me that he only watched the first couple of minutes of this posting each week. So if I failed to grab his interest, by then he turns to something else. I know who you are. Stick with me. I live forever in a dusky valley of uncertainty. Under the rubric of Shver Yid, it's hard to be a Jew. I read in the Israeli press this week that several Orthodox rabbis gave permission to some individuals to drive on the Shabbat. Incredible. They said it was a matter of pikuach nefesh, that is to say, the necessity to save a life overrides the mitzvah regarding Shabbat. Those who were given permission this time to violate the Sabbath were rushing to offer advice to a group of Israeli teenager students in a West Bank yeshiva. Several of those students who are being investigated by the Shin Bet for having killed a Palestinian woman by throwing a rock through the windshield of her car. By the way, these are the same boys other Orthodox rabbis are now pleading for mercy for them because, after all, they're just kids. Just kids in a right-wing religious setting in which they are apparently acquiring a most unpleasant set of values. In this case, pikuach nefesh apparently means saving the boys from being investigated for what looks to be a terrorist murder. The Shin Bet is therefore being equated with murderous enemies of the Jewish people. That is quite an equation. As I said, Shver Yid. Okay, deep breath, back to our text. As we move from a, contemporary plague back to the comfort of ancient plagues. The Sedra is Bo, Exodus chapter 10, verse 1 and following, Egypt. Those multiple confrontations between Moses and Pharaoh have now reached their denouement. The plagues finally will get up close and quite personal for the God King of Egypt. Locusts would swarm throughout the land, consuming whatever crops remained from the previous plagues, and then would come a horrific darkness, a darkness that you could actually feel. And then the slaying of all of the firstborn sons of Egypt. Pharaoh, along with his people, will suffer horrible personal loss. And only then will Pharaoh have had enough. Only then will the Israelites begin their march out of Egypt to Sinai and to freedom. Side note, I have 3 grandchildren who are linked patrilineally to that culturally rich and wonderful Jewish community of Syria, Aleppo to be exact. Now, Aleppo Jews are called Chalabis. So I, a proud, pure-blooded Eastern European Jew with roots in Poland and Belarus, I have attended a number of Chalabi-style Passover Seders. I have eaten charoset, that is sweet with figs. I have seen the leader of the Seder pound on the table and demand that the women come and remove the Seder plate for a moment. That was kind of uncomfortable for me. And I have also seen Exodus chapter 12, verse 34, our Sedra, used as the text for an amazing ritual. The text states that the Israelites left Egypt misharotam srurot besimlotam al shichmam, with their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. As that verse is read, each individual, one by one, is given some matzot wrapped in a cloth, like a bag. That cloth is slung over their shoulders, and the leader asks in Arabic, "Where are you coming from?" And then, "Where are you going?" I quickly learned that the proper answer to the first question is coming from Egypt. The second question, going to Eretz Israel. It's a great ritual. Give it a try this Pesach. But having found that very familiar verse, I looked to its neighboring verse, Exodus 12:35. Something happens here which has resisted 2,000 years of rabbinic interpretation. It states that as the Israelites were leaving, they borrowed silver and gold and fine clothing from the Egyptians. Borrowed. Really? To be returned the next day? Most unlikely. Now, Rashi didn't seem to have a problem here. He referenced a text that said, the Israelites emptied out Egypt. He quoted the text and left it at that. No problems. Ibn Ezra played a bit with various grammatical constructions and then mentioned that the Israelites were quite reasonable in what might politely be called their expropriations. They had a sliding scale, taking the only precious items from the very wealthy and then taking commensurately less from the less well-to-do. Quite thoughtful, those Israelites, kind of socialized theft. Our teachers felt no overwhelming need to explain or to excuse this behavior. Nechama Leibowitz points out that the Israelites were, quote, enslaved, exploited, and downtrodden for 2 generations, and we're left with the feeling that she was okay with this. They were slaves. They had a slave mentality. What do you expect? And besides, the text states that they were just following God's commands. God said they should do that. The quote, "Speak now in the ears of the people and let them borrow," etc. And another again. God had told Moses back in Exodus chapter 3 that the Israelites should not leave Egypt empty-handed. They apparently didn't. And a third aside, Abraham was told in Genesis that the Israelites would one day leave Egypt with great substance. God told, predicted, commanded that they plunder the Egyptians. So let's summarize. Seemingly, the Israelites plundered Egypt, but they are not to be blamed because of the slavery they had endured and because God was commanding them to plunder. The Talmud later added that all the Israelites in fact were doing was collecting back wages for hundreds of years of unpaid labor. So it's fair. The Jewish historian Josephus wanted us to know that the Egyptians, poor folks, were remorseful over what had been done to the Israelites, so they willingly showered our ancestors with gifts. Now remember, one of the basic laws of Torah interpretation, when many reasons are offered for something which is unclear, then nobody really knows what the answer is, and we're going to have to accept that truth right here. My friends, what reparations are there that can cover over or maybe even help heal wounds inflicted upon us? What reparations can make up for the enslavement of Africans in the early history of our country? Slavery was one of the foundational pillars of the burgeoning, growing, basic, original American economy. What we have today started with a basis in slavery. Will any money today remove that stain and that suffering from our history? And if so, who determines how much? By the way, the Israeli government just this week has now determined the amount of money, many billions of dollars, that it is going to claim that the Jewish people is owed because of the expulsion of some 800,000 Jews from Arab countries in 1948 when the State of Israel was formed. What is the expulsion from one's country and one's home worth on the open market today? What is the proper payment for hundreds of years in slavery in Egypt or here in the United States? One modern Jewish scholar said, maybe the best answer to all of this is just give me my freedom now. I don't ask for anything more. This text leaves us troubled, confused, and uncertain. We want our ancestors to act only with the noblest of values. Sometimes that just isn't the case. Sometimes moral issues do not yield clear and reasonable conclusions. Sometimes we have to fight with the text, knowing that the battle, the fight with the text itself is of great value to us. Okay, that's it for today. We have suggested an addition to your Passover Seders. Remember that? And we've encountered a challenge to moral correctness that should forever trouble us. Despite that, have a wonderful Shabbat as you think things through. And before you hit share, I wonder if my colleague is still with us today. Yeah, in any event, please hit share. Have a wonderful Shabbat and a wonderful weekend.